Hey, what's up? Hello everyone, welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, and we are continuing with our series of way too early Oscar predictions, and we are with the specialized categories. That means international feature, animated feature, and documentary categories where you either know completely nothing or you know exactly everything at this point of the year. These are just three very sporadic categories, you can say, for the least.
These are the ones that have the most up in the air, but they're so much fun to follow because if you're following the film festival news, if you're following these critic reactions, you can figure out these categories pretty early. I think a lot of people think they have no idea what's going on in these until the last minute, but if you're really paying attention, by now you kind of have an idea of where things might be headed. You don't know everything. Who would have thought a few years ago that Drive My Car, of all films, was going to go all the way? But I think last year you probably would have had an inkling that All Quiet on the Western Front would at least be nominated at this point. We're going to jump in first into Best International Feature, and I'm really excited to talk about this lineup because obviously we just got the Cannes lineup today, and this has changed my entire lineup here. I went from not knowing any movies to knowing everything. Now, a good rule of thumb in predicting the international feature category: 3 out of 5 films in your lineup should be European. In the past 10 years, the rule of 3 out of 5 in the international feature lineup being European has only been broken twice, because last year 4 out of 5 films were from Europe, and in 2018 only 2 out of 5 were from Europe. So this is a very good guiding principle. Take Cannes very seriously when predicting this category. In the last 10 years, 20 out of 50 nominees in this category have been in Cannes competition, and 4 more films have been in other Cannes selections like Un Certain Regard or some of the side out of competition slots. So that means
So that's about half.
24 out of 50 movies have been at Cannes. In 2020, Cannes didn't exist. But you know what was mentioned in the Cannes lineup that year that did
Another
not
round.
end up premiering? Another Round and Flee. Which means that if those films both premiered at Cannes, there'd be 26 out of 50 that played at Cannes. So take Cannes seriously. And to break down the rest of the 50, 11 out of 50 were at Venice, 6 out of 50 didn't play any fests, 3 out of 50 were at Berlin, 4 out of 50 premiered at TIFF, and 2 out of 50 premiered at Sundance. So Cannes is your best shot.
Yeah, you should have, let's say you were predicting 5 right now. It would be safe to have 3 Cannes movies. Obviously, we don't know the Venice lineup, but you would save 1 slot for Venice, and then you have like 1 wild card slot. And obviously, you can't do Venice until we hit about August, but if you want to play it safe now, you'd be like, okay, this seems like a Venice-type movie, which I know we'll both go into a little bit. I know it's one that you're very high on coming from Netflix. And then that just leaves one other just open slot. You could have it come from Cannes, you could have it be a random movie, or just a movie that you just feel very passionate about.
My guiding principle here is that I'm going to do 3 Cannes and 3 European films, right? I'm using that as my metric here to try and predict this. That will not change by the end of the year. The films might change, but the 3 Cannes, 3 European, it's not going to change. It is going to stay that way. And if I change anything out, it's going to be to follow those guiding principles. So let's start at number 1. The Zone of Interest, directed by Jonathan Glazer. It's very likely to be the United Kingdom's submission to the Oscars. Now, despite being a British production, this film was made in Poland, and it's likely to be in both Polish and German. This is not confirmed. It could still be in English, but everything is looking like it is Polish and German. I think that Zone of Interest is going to win a major prize at Cannes. It's either winning the Palme d'Or or Best Director. It has a great distributor with A24. And apparently it's going to be groundbreaking in some ways. There's 360-degree sets, possibly multiple edits showcasing different perspective, possibly 360-degree cameras. This is one of the most interesting, exciting films of the year. The story is going to be controversial. It's a tongue-in-cheek satire about the root of evil, investigating how people can live ordinary lives alongside horrific acts of evil. How can someone fall in love and live through a whirlwind romance while committing atrocities? It's going to push buttons, but the question is, how does it push the buttons? Does it make people think? Does it make people question? I think Jonathan Glazer is smart enough to make this really work, and I'm starting to think that this makes picture. I'm starting to think this makes director. Maybe screenplay, maybe some text, cinematography, editing, production design, all of those feel very possible. Score, maybe. Get under the skin, out of your head. This is different. This is not some weird artsy movie. This is going to be interesting. It's going to be fresh. It's going to be unique.
I think the biggest thing for this category, at least what you put at number 1, 2, and 3, because I think you should have these 3 movies as your top 3, just the order, who knows, is what does happen at Cannes. There's 2 movies here in your top 3 that are also in my top 3. If they win the Palme d'Or, that probably should be your number 1 for the time being. And if neither of them win the Palme d'Or, I think you put the other movie at number 1. But if one wins Palme d'Or and the other one wins like director or screenplay, then you can put one at 1 and one at 3 sort of thing. So it's very interchangeable, these top 3, but I do agree with Matt that Zone of Interest should probably be your number 1 at the moment because it just sounds the best on paper. Because you also have to consider the fact that Ruben Östlund is the head juror this year at Cannes, and everything Matt just described about Zone of Interest sounds very much up Ruben Östlund's alley. So this movie, at minimum, as Matt said, I think will walk with at least screenplay, if not getting a little bit higher with director or the Palme d'Or itself.
Now, at number 2, we have Netflix's dog in the race, El Conde, The Count, directed by Pablo Larraín. It is very likely to be Chile's submission for the Oscars. Netflix is behind it, and Pablo Larraín is a powerhouse. He has made other Oscar nominees, specifically Spencer, which got Best Actress, and Jackie, which got like 6 nominations. He's working with an American team on this movie, despite being in Chile, including Ed Lachman as cinematographer, who normally works with Todd Haynes. Yes, I do still have this in for picture. I am kind of predicting this to be maybe the most difficult year in this category ever. I think this might be the first year where we have 2 non-English films in Best Picture. Also, this is a dark comedy. It's going to be unique, it's going to be dark, interesting, and it's going to have great reviews, likely to come out of Venice. In the past 5 years, Netflix has been nominated in International Feature 3 out of 5 times, and they've won twice in this category. Netflix doesn't have many other non-English films this year. You know they're going to push it. It's going to get great reviews out of Venice, and this looks like their top dog for the year, I think, in terms of international at least.
I would agree, except for the fact that you said this is going to get great reviews. We said it with Bardo last year, and that failed. So there's a small chance, but we'll have to see how El Conde performs. Does it follow the Bardo route, or does it go more to like a Roma route, where it's just very loved and it goes all the way? I think one thing that could hurt both the movies you have at number 1 and number 2 are the fact that they're both comedic, and would that cancel each other out with the movie that you have at number 3?
Now, number 3, I have the presumed Italian submission, Alice Rohrwacher's La Chimera. This is likely to win a major prize at Cannes, either the Palme, Grand Prix, or Director, I would say. It's got neon backing it in the States. That has been a winning recipe lately in terms of course, the last 3 years, it's been neon every year for the Palme d'Or. From Parasite to Titan to Triangle of Sadness and now La Chimera. They know how to campaign something from Cannes to the Oscars. And Rohrwacher just had a nomination last year for Best Live Action Short for Le Pupille. That said, her films aren't really the most Academy-friendly. I know I just said she just got a nomination, but I'm not looking at her short. I'm looking at her feature, Happy as Lazaro, which, if this film is at all similar to Happy as Lazaro, I am not sure I see this making it into Best Picture. That is a very grimy movie. It's one that I think is very well done, but it might not be very Oscar-y. It's not very Beatty in the slightest. But that said, if this gets the Cannes Award, if it gets heavy critical support, this feels like a shoo-in for a nomination. Again, Neon knows what they're doing.
The biggest question mark with this movie would be something that Arno actually brought up, who is not here to talk today, but something that we all discussed while offline, not recording, is he brought up the fact that they don't often pick women for their submission. And this could be a case like Titan, where clearly this should be the country's submission, and they just don't pick it. And then it just kills its Oscar chances completely across the board.
Number 4, my passion pick of the year, Hayao Miyazaki's How Do You Live, which I sure hope is going to be Japan's submission. The last time that Japan submitted a Hayao Miyazaki movie was in 1997 with Princess Mononoke. This feels so promising. It feels like it could be a potential masterpiece. This is sure to be Miyazaki's last film. It's going to be emotional. It's going to have a massive cultural moment in Japan. If Japan doesn't submit this film, it's an RRR level fuck up if they submit anything else. Also, The Academy nominated Flea in this category, an animated film, just a few years ago. Animation can happen here. It's Miyazaki. All he needs is to get submitted, and he's in. That's my belief. If Japan puts him there, he is in. And at number 5, I have my third Cannes competition film. This is going to be Fallen Leaves, directed by Aki Kaurismäki. This is likely to be Finland's submission. It reminds me of Compartment Number 6 a few years ago, which was another Finnish submission that got very close to the Oscar nomination. Now, Kaurismäki's films are very charming, they're accessible, and they're hopeful. I think that this is a vibe that the Academy is going to go for. Now, something I will say about this, Finland has submitted Aki Kaurismäki, this director, 4 times in the past. Of those 4 times, he has withdrawn his submission twice, saying, I don't want to be a part of some horse race involving awards in America. I don't want to be a part of that. So he withdrew his submission to the Oscars twice. Another time, he was nominated, and he boycotted the ceremony. So it's possible that he gets submitted, and he withdraws himself. Or he campaigns against himself, or he boycotts the ceremony. But for now, this seems like it's going to be submitted by Finland, and it's going to be a lovely, acclaimed film that's going to make people feel good about themselves. So there we go.
I agree about How Do You Live. If it gets the submission, it's in. We saw Flea. I think that's a perfect 1-to-1 example. Animated, international, great reviews, and probably will have great audience reception as well. And then, I'm just not sure what to do with that possible Finland submission because, as you saw, he doesn't really want to be a part of it. Kind of like Cate Blanchett this last year, but at least Cate Blanchett played along. He doesn't really seem like he'll play along. And as we saw with his last submission, the Oscars just didn't care either. They just didn't even bother to nominate him. So that could be the same thing here where he's cool with it competing at Cannes, but anywhere else it's a big issue. And it seems like the Academy may just be off. Like, yeah, you may make great movies, but we don't want a part of this like game that you're kind of playing with us.
I have him in at number 5 because it seems like the most accessible movie in Cannes Comp. Realistically, we could see it be another Un Certain Regard film that we don't know anything about at this point. This is just a filmmaker that we know about, that we know is going to make something good, and we know is likely going to be submission. So let's look at some other options, some possible things that you could put in. Instead, I'll give you pros, cons. First one is going to be About Dry Grasses, Nuri Bilge Ceylan from Turkey. This is in Cannes competition. Ceylan has never been nominated before because his films are very long, slow, inaccessible, and considered very boring by many. But we live in an era where Drive My Car was nominated for Best Picture. Anything can happen, and Ceylan is going to have one of the most acclaimed films of the year. It's going to get like a 90 to 95 on Metacritic. This is going to be big. It's possible that people just end up liking the intellectual side of this so much that it gets in. Next one, we're going to talk about Four Daughters, which is directed by Kawther Ben-Hania from Tunisia. This is Cannes competition. Now, Ben-Hania was nominated in 2020 for The Man Who Sold His Skin. Could very well repeat, especially if the film does as well as I expect it to at Cannes. I think it could win the runner-up prize, the grand prize at the festival. So if it does that, watch out. It could be coming for this. Next one I'll talk about is The Peasants, which is a Polish animated film. This, I almost put it in my top 5, and then I went, wait a goddamn second. I'm not putting 2 animated films in my top 5 for international feature. That's ridiculous. Now, this was supposed to be ready for Cannes, but due to the war in Ukraine, it's been delayed to the fall. It's looking at a likely Venice or TIFF premiere, but it's from the director of Loving Vincent. It has the same animation style. It looks stunning. I think it actually looks more beautiful than Loving Vincent. And all they need to do is write a better script than Loving Vincent. After that, there's Totem from Mexico. It played Berlin to a ton of acclaim. It was purchased by Janus Films, aka the Criterion Collection, who successfully campaigned Drive My Car and EO to nominations. This is going to be a critical darling. The question is, though, is it going to be accessible? Because Berlin titles are often not accessible. They're quite dull at times, I would say. I don't want to say dull because I like a lot of Berlin films. They're not for everyone. Then we've got Banal and Amela from Senegal. This is a directorial debut in Cannes competition, which rarely happens. It's happened 4 times in the last decade. The first one, Son of Saul, won the Oscar. The next one, Les Miserables, nominated for the Oscar. Third one, Atlantics, shortlisted for the Oscar. All 4 have at least been submitted by their countries. that's a good track record. Just very briefly, remaining Cannes films that look like interesting prospects: The Breaking Ice from Singapore, Club Zero from Austria, The Passion of Dodin Buffon from France, Perfect Days from Germany, and of course, Monster from Japan. In terms of Berlin films, there's Afire from Germany and 20,000 Species of Bees from Spain, and a Sundance documentary, The Eternal Memory from Chile, and of course, no premiere specified, The Perfumed Hill from Morocco.
This is a category where, as we mentioned before, some people don't really know what to do this early, and I'm one of them. While I now know more titles after seeing this Cannes lineup before on my little predictions, I just had 3 movies listed, and now I have a full slate of 10 on my predictions.
Hey,
so
there you go.
We're improving, and I have 4 of the same top 5 as you. I am following that European rule of 3 because I do have 3 here. I have UK, I have Italy, and I have Turkey, because at my number 5, I do have About Dry Grasses. I get the complaints of this may be not it, but it could be, and the high critical reception could, ease it in. I'm not really sure what to do with that 5th slot, as we see in most years. But last year, I was right with EO being in. I just wasn't right with some of the higher stuff. So maybe About Dry Glasses can be this year's EO. Probably not. But I kind of want to say Four Daughters may just be my meme pick for the year, because Four Brothers, Four Daughters, close enough, and watch it turn out to be true. I do kind of want to put Totem from Mexico higher. Right now I have that number 9 behind some other stuff that you mentioned that's higher. I have that 9 just because, as you mentioned, it does have Janice. Janice has proven we can get stuff in, even if they don't seem likely. EO got in, Drive My Car got in. Maybe they can get Totem in, but Mexico failed last year at Bardo. I know Bardo was very divisive, but still was the big movie. It seemed pretty easy to vote for, but clearly not enough to make it in. So maybe Mexico is not as strong as they had previously seen in the past.
Yeah, the thing I'll say as well about Janice is they're likely to buy a few films from Cannes. So it's very likely that our EO hasn't emerged yet, because they might buy something and put all of their energy into that.
So that brings us into animated feature. In this category, I'm not really sure what to do, because the consensus seems to be Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. However, I think a lot of people are overselling this movie. Not that I think it will not be good, but there's people saying this is going to be the best movie of the year. It's going to win Best Picture, not win Best Picture, but it's going to be nominated for Best Picture. And I get that probably more fanboys than Oscar pundits, but I've seen some pundits and some critics out there saying this as well. The first movie, I don't think was anywhere close to a picture nomination, and it won animated feature after the nominations. I think on nomination morning, it was a race, and then by the time the Oscars happened, it was the by far winner. And I think this one's kind of going to suffer from coming out too early. I know the last one suffered from coming out too late, but I think How Do You Live is probably just too strong, especially if it is going to be Miyazaki's last film. And I think that is probably, maybe it's not the safe number 1, but to me, it's the smart number 1 at this moment. So I have How Do You Live at 1, Cross the Spider-Verse at 2, and I am a believer in Pixar. I think Elemental's in. I know last year they did not get in with Lightyear, but also Lightyear was, I wouldn't say panned, but there's not many people who love Lightyear. I think Elemental is going to be fine. I think Elemental will be a lot like Luca, where there's not many people who say they love it. I'm someone who loves Luca, but not many people out there who say this is a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10. But everyone can agree this is well made, it's well animated, it's solid. It's a solid, like, Turning Red type nomination from last year, where it's number 4, number 3 all season, and it's never in winning contention, but it's never at a risk to go out. After that, I think is where you do get your chance picks. I have Wishing at the moment from Disney. Maybe that's a reach, but it's Disney's 100th. This feels like a movie Disney's going to push a lot. As we saw last year, they missed out, but they didn't push Strange World. I think they're going to push Wish very hard. And unless this movie's a complete disaster, box office and critically, I feel like it's pretty good in. So, Matt, how do you feel about those top 4? I wouldn't say these are safe, but I think the top 3 are safe, and Wish feels pretty good at this moment.
Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I have reliable intel from within Sony Pictures that this is potentially better than the first one. And if that's the case, I don't see why it couldn't potentially make it into Best Picture. I mean, I'm not going to say it's happening, but I'm not going to say it's definitely not happening. I've got it in my top 20 because if it really is the same juggernaut that the first one is, I see what people are talking about with the first one. If it was released earlier, maybe it would have built up a little bit more buzz. Whereas by the time it released in late December of 2018, there was no time to build up buzz for it. It kind of just had only animated going on because the rest of the
Yeah.
race had already been decided.
My biggest drawback with that is what we talked about a few weeks ago with Pinocchio. If Guillermo del Toro couldn't power that into any category outside of animation, I don't know how anyone else really can unless you're win competitive in picture.
Elemental, I would agree. I think it looks pretty safe. That said, wouldn't it be so funny if on Disney's 100 they did not get a nomination in Best Animated Feature at all?
That
Wouldn't that
would
be
that would
hilarious?
be that would fit the memes, and especially the fact that they hit a bio commercial to promote that during last year's Oscars. But I think at minimum, Elemental's in. I could see Wish missing out, but I think Elemental's pretty safe. I say that, and
Yeah.
that's how a lot of people have felt about previous Disney movies in the years past. But some do miss, but like Frozen 2, or even last year when we all were like, oh yeah, Strange World, it'll be fine. But I don't think Wish will bomb like Strange World did. But maybe that will be an early competitor for a big L next year.
I don't know. I want to see more from Wish. I want to hear the music because I think Encanto, the secret to that winning was just the fact that it had a soundtrack that everyone was listening to. So if Wish really has an iconic Disney soundtrack, there's nothing we can do. It's coming.
I don't see Wish winning, but it could become a lot stronger. So that brings me to my number 5 slot, and here's where my big questions start going because it makes sense looking at the upcoming schedule for me to put the Chicken Run sequel because the first one performed so well. I don't know if this is coming out though. I feel like we would have some word about it at this point if it was, but also it's Netflix. They don't really have to promote anything until right before it comes out. But still, the fact that there hasn't been anything about it scares me a little because we did have that Netflix like year upcoming stuff, and there wasn't even a clip for this in there where we did have a clip for like the killer and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
we
I
didn't have
do
a
have
clip
that.
for Del Toro's Pinocchio at this point last year, though.
I have Dawn the Nugget at number 6 right now just to play it
Okay.
safe because I don't know, and I just have this small feeling that the new animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie could
Yeah.
spark. It could spark. It has an
Looks
interesting
great.
animation style. Maybe it loses points because it does look like Across the Spider Verse, but it has an interesting animation style. The voice cast sounds fun. It's a known brand, it's a known IP, and it seems like a movie that a lot of people will just get behind. Like, yeah, this is fun. And I also think this could be a box office success in the month of August. So it has a lot of features coming together that just pushes it in there and edges it in there for number 5. But I will say if Chicken Run does come out or Netflix does acquire something and like pushes it, maybe could get in because as we saw in it last year, Netflix is strong. They won and they also willed their way in for a random nomination for the CBs. After that, I have Spellbound at 7. It's Apple. They haven't performed very well so far, but this does have good animation. It could maybe will its way in solely on the animation, and it will also have music, which could be another, enticing factor to get it in. But I don't have much faith in Apple TV Plus until they prove themselves with something they tried last year with Luck, and that completely flopped. Peasants is at number 8. Probably should be
Mm.
higher, but also I don't see 2 international movies in this lineup. I don't think the animation nominees are ever that cool. Like I know this is a category anyone
They
can vote
used to
on.
be.
This they used to be, but this is a category anyone can vote on, and I don't think they'll put 2 in. I'm still surprised Flea made it a few years ago. Even though I love Flea, I'm still surprised they actually nominated it. Then that brings us to everyone's favorite topic, Illumination, where they round out my list at 9 and 10. They've only ever gotten 1 nomination, and that was for Despicable Me 2. Super Mario Bros., Migration, they're both here. Migration, I don't think has a shot at all, but I had to have a 10th film, and Super Mario is at number 9. It was in my top 5 until the critic reviews came out, and the critic reviews killed it for me. Matt mentioned this during our review of the movie. This would be the lowest critic rating film to make it in the lineup in years, and I just don't see this movie being the one to overcome that. Like I could see Wish if it has bad reviews overcoming because it will have the music factor and it will be more fresh on people's mind. Mario, while it's making a lot of money at the box office, it's the ratings are just so low and it's so divisive, surprisingly as well.
Ferdinand year. Yes, it gave us Boss Baby and Ferdinand, but it also gave us Loving Vincent, aka The Peasants, and it gave us The Breadwinner, which were both independent animated movies. So I don't see why you can't fit The Peasants in as well as How Do You Live. Like, yes, they're both in another language, but at the same time, by the Oscars, they'll probably have released dubbed versions of those films. I'll give you some other options as well. Look out for They Shot the Piano Player. It's a Cuban film, I believe Cuban, It's from the directors that made an animated nominee from 2011 called Chico and Rita. So they've been nominated in the past. This was supposed to be in Cannes competition and then was pulled at the last moment or something. But there was heavy rumors that They Shot the Piano Player was in Cannes comp. Also, Suzume, it's an anime film. It's releasing right now. Probably won't make it, but it's from the same director as Your Name and Weathering with You. Then there's Nimona, which is a Netflix movie. So if Chicken Run isn't happening, this is probably the one to ride with, Nimona. And then Ernest and Celestine 2. The first Ernest and Celestine is a French animated movie. That got a nomination. The second one was already released in France last year. Didn't make a huge splash, but it's possible that it could be charming enough to make it here. I don't think it will, but it is a possibility.
Cool. I'll keep all those in mind. I think the Netflix one's probably the biggest one. I'm still a little whatever. One did nominate two, so I put in a third international movie in my top 10, maybe a little bit of a stretch. And I don't know if the Academy would give the time of day to an anime film, but I guess it has to eventually.
Mirai a few years ago. Mirai was the one that I'd use as, and I mean, How Do You Live is anime, so it's
good point.
But Miyazaki is on a different level of respect. I think they take him very seriously, so I wouldn't consider it the same thing. But okay, let's hit documentary now. We're going to move to the next and last category today. Now, the biggest thing here is that 3 of 4 of these movies need to be from Sundance. Actually, this is, I think, one of the easiest categories to predict this far out because almost all of these films have been seen, right? We haven't seen them, but there are only about 1 or 2 movies that are going to end up in contention at the end of the year that by April have not been seen. At this point last year, we hadn't seen All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. We hadn't seen Goodnight Oppie. We didn't know that those movies existed. But otherwise, everything we knew at this point. So first up, let's go with the political choice. This is going to be my number 1. The war in Ukraine rages on, and the film 20 Days in Mariupol is a film all about the war. It gets right into the terrors of war in a way that no documentary has in Ukraine so far. It's going to be hard to watch, but this is a surefire nominee and a likely winner. It exposes what is happening on the ground in Ukraine. It is less artistic filmmaking and more vital journalism to show what's happening in the world and the horrific atrocities that Russia is committing in Ukraine right now. Now, in second place, we have Beyond Utopia. It's another Sundance movie. It got rave reviews. This one is about North Korea. It's another political pick, has the best reviews out of any doc at Sundance, even more than 20 Days in Mariupol, but it's less in the headlines at the moment. So I would go with the political pick, 20 Days in Mariupol, over this, but who knows? Maybe Kim Jong-un does some stupid shit in October, and this film becomes the one to beat.
I don't know if they're going to go with 2 Ukraine-related documentaries in back-to-back years for the win. I do think it's probably pretty safe for a nomination. But we did talk about Cannes earlier, and there's one documentary there by someone that is very well regarded and is a previous Oscar winner, and maybe could carry over in this category for a win, but also it does carry a hefty 4-hour runtime, which probably does hurt it.
That definitely hurts it. I do have it in my top 5. It is at number 5. That's Steve McQueen's Occupied City. Tells the story of Amsterdam in the Second World War. But that said, it is risky predicting a big filmmaker who happens to be making a doc. This happens all the time. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes you get Ava DuVernay doing 13th. I don't know. I have him at number 5 because I'm sure this film is going to be fantastic. But it is 4 hours long. Go back from spot number 5. Let's go to spot number 3. This is The Eternal Memory. It's another Sundance movie. This won the Grand Jury Prize in the World Documentary category at Sundance. This is from the same director as The Mole Agent, which was nominated in 2020. And this movie follows the story of an elderly couple struggling with dementia. Apparently, this is a beautiful, beautiful movie. I'm sure it's going to be very cute, very moving. It's going to make the audience cry. But we're going to move outside of Sundance for number 4. I have The Echo. This is the new film by Tatiana Hueso, who previously directed Prayers for the Stolen, which landed her a DGA nomination for Best First Time Director. This is her first documentary film. It's a movie about intergenerational bonds and about young women caring for their grandmothers in a small town in Mexico. It has great reviews. This could be something along the lines of like a few years ago there was Hale County, this evening. This feels like that. After that, I'm not going to go into too much detail as I'm going to be seeing many of these films soon and I'll know much more what they're about. The Disappearance of Cher Height could be a fascinating biodoc. It's a film about a sex researcher. Then there's The Deepest Breath. This has Netflix and A24 behind it. It has great reviews. But that said, it's from a section of Sundance that typically does not get nominations here. It would be breaking a long-running statistic for it to get nominated just by being in the premieres category of Sundance. Then there's Iron Butterflies. This is another Ukraine movie, specifically about the Malaysian Airlines flight that was shot down over eastern Ukraine, and it's about the discovery that what shot it down was in fact a Russian shell. Then there is a film that I have seen, A Still Small Voice, which is about a hospital chaplain who experiences burnout as she deals with death and grief on a daily basis as her job. It has some incredibly impactful scenes in it, which could carry it to a nomination or at least to the shortlist. Then there's the film On the Adamant. This was the Berlin Golden Bear winner this year. It won the top prize at Berlin. That is worth mentioning. And then, of course, this is not going to happen at the Oscars, but it's worth mentioning the first documentary in competition at Cannes in 19 years, Jeunesse, Youth, which comes from the director Wang Bing. But that said, his films are all 8 hours long and very slow, so I don't know what this movie's going to be, but I don't expect it to be an Oscar nomination. It's just worth mentioning anyways.
At least hearing the rest of your list there, the one that stands out to me most based on the premise would be Iron Butterflies, just because it's a story that a lot of people do know and do resonate with. So maybe that's a potential number 5. But as you mentioned at the start of this category, we know about 3 or maybe 4 of our competitors now, but there's always one that hasn't even premiered yet, may not even be on anyone's radar at the moment. But once we hit Venice, once we hit TIFF, then we should know the rest of our main competitors.
We're going to know all of these nominees all year long, but they're going to be different ones than we expect. Like, for example, last year, I saw A House Full of Splinters about this time last year. And when I saw it, I went into that thinking, this could be an Oscar nomination. And I left it going, this is not an Oscar nomination. And I kept to that all year long, saying there's no way A House Made of Splinters gets an Oscar nomination. And then it did in the end. So ultimately, do we know the movies at this point? Yes, we do. We do know the movies. They've all premiered at this point, except for maybe 1 or 2. What we don't know is which ones are going to last, which ones are going to release, which ones are going to connect at the end of the year.
Well, if it's not one of those 2 documentaries that you mentioned at the very start, the one about Ukraine and the one about Korea, it could be something that does pop up at Venice or does pop up at TIFF, or like you mentioned, something like A House Made of Splinters that maybe you've seen or other people have seen, but it comes out of nowhere. That's I think the most fun thing about this documentary category. It's so random.
But this is a category that I'm excited for. Since I live in Toronto, I get to go to the Hot Docs Film Festival in just a few weeks, and I get to see like 90% of these movies.
But until then, my name is Dyl.
And my name is Matt, and this has been Fantasy Filmball.